Do you want to learn to play Coloma?
In this video, we're going to take you through the rules to the game Coloma, and if you stay tuned till the end, we'll have some tips and strategies from the game's designer, Jonathan Pat Canton, coming up. Hi, it's Tarrant.
And Stella from Meeple University, bringing you a variety of quality board game videos.
In this video, we're going to show you how to play Coloma, a game from Jonathan Pat Canton and published by Final Frontier Games.
Let's get to the table.
The game of Coloma is set in the town of Coloma in 1848, at the start of the California Gold Rush. Prospectors are flooding into the town in search of their fortune in gold, and players play the role of industrialists working to build up the infrastructure of Coloma to support this influx of prospectors. Players will choose their actions in each round from a central rondel in building up the town, trying to earn victory points for building buildings, surveying rivers and building bridges over them, settling out in the frontier lands, and defending the town from outlaws. The game plays over 3 rounds, each of which has 5 turns and finishes with a gunfight. The player with the most points wins. We're teaching you the game from a prototype copy, so the art, rules and components may not be final, and some pieces have been borrowed from other games. I won't take you through the full setup of the main board, but I will highlight a couple of key points. The main thing to remember when following the rules for setting up the main board is that a lot of the components will vary in number depending on the number of players in the game. To set up the gold section, fill up all of these spaces up to the column corresponding to your player count. Your section will look different to this because there have been some changes made since the prototype. This sets the total amount of gold that will be available in the game and sets its economy. Any leftover gold cubes are not used in your game. To set up the hideout section, you'll place 2 of the black outlaw meeples into this circle, and you can remember this from this indication down in the left hand corner of the board. Place 4 face-up barrels into these spaces on the hideout track, and use a 5th one if you're playing with 5 players. Any leftover barrels are placed face down off to the side of the board, and through the game you'll be able to take barrels either from this face-up row or from this face-down section, depending on the action you take. To set up each player's player area, the player takes a player board, an action selection wheel, $2, a gold which comes from the onboard gold supply that we just set up before, 1 horse, and then all the pieces in his or her colour. The main wooden pieces that players have are dudes and camps, and these will be kept in 2 locations. Those on the player board are known as in the lodge, and these are the ones that are ready to be used immediately in actions. Ones off the board are known as the player's personal reserve, and the player needs to move them to the lodge before being able to use them in actions. It's important that players keep their personal reserve separate from their lodge. To start the game, the player will have 4 dudes in the lodge and 8 in the reserve, and will have 1 camp on the lodge and 7 in the reserve. Each player shuffles his or her personal deck of cards, draws 6 of them, looks through them, and chooses 4 to keep. The other 2 are discarded, and in this game, discarding means either to place it back on top of your personal deck or onto the bottom of your personal deck. This is your choice. All player decks are identical except for the colour on the back. Follow the rest of the steps of setup in the book and you're now ready to play. The game of Coloma is played in 3 rounds, each round containing 5 turns plus a gunfight. The 5 turns in each round are tracked by moving this wheel around this rondel. And on each turn, players will activate the event, which is shown in these boxes and will give the player an income, and then simultaneously choose actions from the ones visible on the rondel. This means that players will make 5 action selections per round and a total of 15 for the game. So now let's look at each of these steps. The first step in each round is to rotate the barca tile and the bust tile, and these are the 2 pieces that are attached to the board. Rotate the barca tile, which is the larger one, 1 step clockwise, and rotate the bust tile, which is the little X, so that it covers the signpost. In this way, they'll move progressively around the rondel on each turn. Secondly, you'll resolve the event at the current location of the barca. Resolving the event allows all players to gain the resources printed on the wooden plank at that event. So in this case, all players would take 2 dudes from their personal reserve and place them into their lodge. Here, all players gain a gold from the onboard gold supply. Here, players draw 2 cards. Here, players gain 2 bucks. And here, players may exchange 1 gold for 3 victory points. Through the game, players may build camps at these events, and we'll talk about how you do that later. But any player with a camp at an event gets double the reward of that event. So these 2 players would gain 4 dudes instead of 2, and this player would be able to exchange 2 gold for 6 points instead of just 1 for 3. The third step of each round is that players will simultaneously choose which of these 5 sites to visit by choosing a wedge on this action selection disc. All players reveal their choices simultaneously, and then all players move their pioneer meeples to the wedge that they've chosen. Then, after revealing, you will move the bust marker to the wedge which has the most meeples on it. In the event of a tie, it simply stays in its starting location. Then, in location order, and in turn order, starting from the player with the first player marker, if there are multiple players in a location, players will take the actions visible at the site where their pioneer is located. After all actions are taken, players retrieve their pioneer meeples and proceed to the next turn. So let's now talk about the implications of these rotating pieces on action selection and taking actions. Each of the items printed on the board and on one of these rotating pieces represents an action in the game. The rondel is broken into 2 pieces, the outer ring, which is known as the common action, and the inner ring, which is known as the boom action. When a player visits a location and both the common and boom actions are visible, then the player will get to take both actions. But when the bust marker moves to cover the boom action of a highly populated location, the boom action is no longer visible, and players who have gone there will only be able to take the common action on this turn. This means players will get more actions if they choose locations that other people haven't gone to. Remember that the bust marker will not move from its starting location if there is a tie for most populated site. So the location which starts with the bust marker is still at higher risk of having only a common action to take. The other thing to know about the bust marker is that when the bust marker moves from its starting location, it reveals a signpost. The signpost is not an action in its own right. It's pointing to a different boom action. And so, for a player who has chosen this location, he or she will be doing this common action and the boom action printed to the left of that location. If the signpost ends up pointing to the bust marker, then this still is worth no action. The other thing that's going to happen from turn to turn is that the barca is going to move around, and the basic barca action is going to cover one of the main actions on the board. This means that it's predictable which actions are going to be blocked out by the barca, but you do need to plan for it. Next, I'm going to take you through all of the different actions that are available on this rondel in detail. Because one action flows onto the next, I'm not going to do them in numerical order. I'm going to start with action number 3, constructing buildings. When you go to this location, the common action is to build a building using a hammer, and the boom action is to build a building using a saw. This means that if you visit the location and the boom is not covered up, you'll be able to construct 2 buildings in one turn. Buildings are constructed from your hand, and all of the cards in your hand are different buildings. When you construct a building, you place it face up into a tableau next to your player board. The cost to construct a building is shown in the top left corner of the card, and it's the same for all buildings. If you're building using a hammer action, it will cost you 2 bucks and 2 dudes, who must be returned from your lodge to your personal reserve. To construct a building using a saw, you must spend 1 gold and return 1 dude from your lodge to your personal reserve. This is the only difference between using the hammer action and the saw action to construct a building. A couple of notes about paying money and gold. Anytime during the game that you pay gold, it's returned to an off-board collection of gold which has been spent in this round. Any gold that is off the board will ultimately be refilled into the gold market at the end of each round. Secondly, any time you are to spend money in the game, you can instead spend gold at its current market value, which is printed here. The market value of all gold that players might want to spend as money depends on which row is the last one to have a gold taken from it. So at this point, gold would be worth 3 coins. At this point, gold would still be worth 3 coins, and at this point, all gold would drop in value to 2 coins. Players can always spend gold as money across any action in the game, but can never spend money as gold. And if a player overpays a money price using gold, he or she does not get change from the bank. After constructing the building, the player immediately takes 6 victory points, and now has access to some new bonus actions, which will activate whenever the player visits the specific location shown by this number. If it shows this symbol, then it activates when the player reaches the rotating location of the barca wedge. The other option when taking a construct building action is to construct a hotel. Hotels are taken from the stack of hotel cards on the main board. To construct a hotel, take the card and then place it over one of your existing town buildings. As usual, you'll pay the costs shown in the top left corner, which has both a hammer and a saw option, but this time instead of costing you dudes, you will have to return horses to the main supply. Building a hotel will once again gain you 6 points, and it will gain you some endgame points for having leftover dudes in your lodge, and we'll talk more about that again later. However, it is going to cover up whatever action was on the building that you've placed it on. And so hotels are likely to be more of an endgame play. The next location I'm going to talk about is number 1, the workday action. When you visit this location, the common action is to use the shovel, and the boom action is to use the wheelbarrow. So what does this mean? On each player board, next to Suitor's Mill, you'll see a number 1 with a shovel and a wheelbarrow. And on any buildings that you've constructed which have a number 1 linkage, you will also see a shovel and a wheelbarrow. When you activate the shovel on the main board, you can take all of the shovel actions that you've unlocked. And when you activate the wheelbarrow action, you can also activate all of the wheelbarrows that you've unlocked. So in this case, for activating the shovel action, the player would draw 2 cards, gain a new horse and a new camp. And for the wheelbarrow action, would take a gold, could buy another horse for 1 coin, and can discard a card to gain another camp from his or her reserve. The shovel and the wheelbarrow are not the only way of getting resources in the game, but if you build a good engine, it can be one of the most effective ways of getting resources quickly. But there are a few restrictions on resource gathering that we'll cover now. If the gold market on the board ever runs out of gold, then you cannot take any more. You cannot gain more camps or dudes than you have available to take from your personal reserve. Players may not have more than 4 horses at any given time. When drawing cards, a player draws from the top of his or her deck and adds to hand. A player has an unlimited hand size. If a player has drawn his or her entire draw deck into hand and is instructed to draw more cards, then for each card the player cannot draw, the player instead gets 1 victory point. This is called milling the deck, and it can be a valuable victory points generator for players who go heavily into a card drawing strategy. Next we'll talk about location number 2, rivers and bridges. The common action at this location is to survey a river or build a bridge using a hammer. The boom action is to survey a river or build a bridge using a saw. In this way, this location works in a very similar way to location 3. You'll be able to do 2 actions as long as you pay the hammer cost for one and the saw cost for the other. To survey a river, you'll pay the costs that are shown here. This is the same cost as to build a building. To build a bridge, you'll pay the costs shown here. This is double the costs of paying a building or surveying a river. If you survey a river, take one of the river tokens from this stack, and then place it above your player board into one of the 4 surveyed river locations. River tokens are unlimited in the game, but no player may have more than 4. Player then immediately gets the victory points shown at the location of that river, plus the additional bonus. In this case, it's a camp from the player's reserve to his or her lodge. Another of the available bonuses is 1 or 2 barrels, and when a player takes a barrel bonus in this manner, he or she draws a barrel from the face down stacks and then places it face up in his or her collection. Either immediately or at any later stage in the game, the player may flip the barrel face down in order to take its benefit. The player should keep the collection of used barrels, as these can come into play later in the game. Taking these barrel bonuses does not come from the face-up barrels in the hideout location of the board. When a player builds a bridge, he or she may take any one of the available bridges and place it over one of his or her surveyed rivers. If the player has no unbridged surveyed rivers available, he or she cannot build a bridge. Bridges do not give any immediate victory points nor any ongoing action, but they will be worth end-game victory points depending on whether you meet the condition shown on that bridge. For example, this one's worth 3 points per horse, and this one's worth 3 points per barrel collected. There are 6 different types of bridges, and within each stack, the same sort of bridge can be found. Once a type of bridge has been completely exhausted, it is no longer available for other players. The number of bridges in each stack depends on your player count. Note that each of these endgame bonuses is subject to a maximum, which is printed in the bottom right corner of the bridge. Location number 4 allows you to explore the frontier, which is represented by this wagon icon. When you visit the location, you'll be able to move your wagon on the frontier lands either once or twice, depending on whether the bust marker is there or not. When taking the wagon action, the player may move his or her wagon along the brown or dark blue lines up to as many spaces as the number of horses that the player presently has. When counting up spaces, the player skips over any that are currently occupied, so the red player could move 1, 2, 3 spaces up to there. Multiple players may occupy one of the frontier towns at once. Whenever a player's wagon moves onto or through a location which has a benefit printed on the board, the player immediately gains that benefit. This excludes any which are covered by other players' wagons. So for that last red movement, the player would gain 2 gold. Players can also move through spaces which will allow them to gain more dudes from their personal reserves. And the frontier towns allow players to get more camps, take barrels from the face down supply, or gain a horse. When a player moves onto and stops at one of the frontier towns, he or she may choose from either of these 2 benefits. But if a player moves through the town without stopping, he or she may only take the dude's benefit. Players cannot double back within a single wagon action. However, if the player has 2 wagon actions, he or she may move one direction with one and then double back for the second wagon action. The 5th location is to settle the frontiers and defend Coloma, and there's a few different actions involved here. When you visit this location, you may place dudes into the gunfight, place camps onto the frontier map, and place camps onto events. And I'll go through how you do each of these in sequence, but remember that you will be able to do all of them on the same turn. The boom action at this location is to gain an extra camp from your reserve. To place dudes into the gunfight, choose one of the 5 rows at the gunfight, and then take as many dudes from your lodge as is required to completely fill it. You must completely fill a row, you can only fill 1 row on your turn, and each row may only be occupied by a single player's dudes. There's a little bit more for us to learn before we understand exactly how the gunfight works, but ultimately this is another way of gaining victory points, and we'll come back to that later. The second option is to build a camp or camps onto the frontier map. You can only perform this action if your wagon is in one of the 4 frontier cities on the corner of the map. Then take a camp from your lodge and place it onto one of the frontier lands, these coloured areas, which is adjacent to the location of your wagon. Multiple players may build camps in the same land. If you have multiple camps available and you're at one of these 2 cities, then you'll be able to build camps into 2 lands on the same turn. You cannot build multiple camps into the same land. These camps provide you with no immediate or ongoing bonus, but they'll be worth victory points at the end of the game based on how many you place. The final option at this location is to place camps onto events. You can place any number of camps from your lodge onto events on the same round, and there is no restriction on which events are open to you in a given location. You cannot have more than one camp on the same location, and multiple players may share the same event. Recall that having a camp at an event means that you will get double that income bonus when the barca moves around to that location. There are no victory points for these camps unless you have the bridge that combos up with it. So let's consider the implications of that. You have a total of 8 camps available to you in the game and 10 potential locations to put them. 5 of them on the events will get you income but no points, and the 5 on the map can get you points but no income. And so balancing out what's going to get you the most points overall is an important part of the game. You'll also need to get all 8 of your camps from your reserve to your lodge in order to take full advantage of these options. So, in summary, for a single visit to the common action at number 5, you can fill up 1 row at the gunfight and then place as many camps as you want, either onto valid locations on the map or onto any events on the rondel. The final location is the barca, which rotates from turn to turn. The common action at the barca gives you a way of gaining camps and horses if you have no other way. You can spend $2 for a camp, or 1 gold for a horse, and you may do this as many times as you want on a single action. The boom action on the barca is to take a barrel from the hideout. To take a barrel from the hideout, choose from any of the face-up barrels shown here at the top of the board, and then place a number of outlaws based on what's printed under that barrel into the gunfight. These extra outlaws will influence the outcome of the gunfight. Do not replenish the barrel that you've taken. This will be replenished at the end of the round. Note that this action is the only way to take these barrels from the top of the board, and the only way to get new outlaws into the gunfight. Any other direction to take a barrel as a bonus during the game will come from the face down supply off the board, and this will not put new outlaws into the gunfight. Once all actions have been resolved, the round will proceed to the gunfight. Count up the total number of player meeples in the gunfight rows and compare it to the number of outlaws. If there are more players than outlaws, then the players win. If there are as many outlaws as players or more, then the outlaws win. Then refer to these tables on the bottom left corner of the board for rewards and penalties. If the players win the gunfight, refer to this table, and if the outlaws win, refer to this table. Whichever player has committed the most dudes to the gunfight gains 6 or 3 points and takes the first player marker for the next round. Remember that although the locations are resolved in location order, where there are multiple players at a location, whoever has the first player marker acts first and clockwise around from there. If there's a tie for first, or any other position, then whoever has dudes closer to the front of the gunfight breaks the tie. Whoever has the second most dudes at the gunfight gains 3 or 1 victory points, and anyone else who has dudes at the gunfight, i.e. third or beyond, gains 1 victory point if the players win, or suffers 1 casualty if the outlaws win. If you suffer a casualty, take a dude from your reserve, not from your lodge, and place it into one of the lowest numbered remaining spaces in your graveyard. If your reserve is empty, then take them from your lodge. A dude in the graveyard will never re-enter your reserve or lodge, and will be worth negative victory points based on the number that it covers. If you elect not to commit any dudes to a gunfight in a given round, then you'll suffer the penalty in the 0 column. 2 casualties if the players win, and 3 casualties if the players lose. So players can lose a lot of their 12 dudes if they choose not to commit to any of the gunfights, and players need to weigh this up when they're choosing whether or not to put their dudes there. After the gunfight, proceed to the next round, and you'll do a little bit of resetting before the round begins. This number tells you how many outlaws begin in the gunfight in this round, and this will escalate as the game goes on. Any player dudes at that location go back to those players' reserves. Sweep out any unused hideout barrels and then place new barrels into the hideout, filling this space if you're playing with 5. Finally, take any gold that was spent during the last round and refill it into the gold market. This should not bring the gold market to its full capacity, as players will still be holding on to some of their gold from the previous round. Remember only to use the columns corresponding to your player count. After the third gunfight, the game is over and proceed to endgame scoring. Through the game, players will have been tracking the points that they've earned in gunfights, from building buildings, and from surveying rivers, as well as milling the deck if they've drawn their whole deck into their hand. Then there are 4 additional steps for end of game scoring. Each hotel that a player has built is worth an end game victory point bonus equal to 1 point per dude left in their lodge, up to a maximum of 6. So in this case, the player would gain 4 points for this hotel, in addition to the 6 already gained during the game. The same dudes can be counted in multiple hotels, so if the player had 2 hotels and 4 leftover dudes, that would add up to a total of 8 points. Then the player scores for bridges. Each bridge has a condition which is worth 3 points each time it's completed, up to a maximum. So here the player gains 3 points per horse for a total of 9. And here the player gains 3 points per 2 money, up to a maximum of 15 points, which is the amount earned here. Next, count up the number of camps that you've built into the frontier lands and score them based on this track here. In this case, 3 camps is worth 10 points. Finally, lose points for any dudes in your graveyard. In this case, the player would lose 2 points. The player with the highest score wins, and in the event of a tie, whoever has the most leftover gold wins. If still tied, whoever's built the most buildings and hotels wins, and if still tied, victory is shared. When playing the game with 2 players, a neutral colour, the black player, Buster the Bandit, is used in order to keep the rondel busy. At the start of each turn, before the players choose their locations, flip over 2 cards from Buster's deck. Buster's deck contains 5 cards, each with a number from 1 to 5. This tells you 2 locations that Buster definitely will not be going to in this round. Then, each player simultaneously chooses his or her location for the round, and then flip the next card from Buster's deck. This tells you the location that Buster will be going to. Buster's Meeple will then be counted in the determination for where the bust marker moves. After each round is complete, Buster's entire hand of 5 cards is gathered up and shuffled again for the next turn. Additionally, the third row of the gunfight is always filled out by a non-player colours dudes, and these will count on your side in a gunfight. The game will also come with rules for solo play, but we won't cover those in this video.
And that's how to play Coloma.
Now we have a special guest, the game's designer Jonathan Pat Canton, giving us some tips and strategies on how to play the game.
Hi Johnny!
Howdy Stella, howdy Tarrant, and everybody at Meeple University. My name's Johnny Pack. Thanks for checking out my game Coloma. So I want to tell you a couple tips about how to play it in maybe some different ways than what you'd assume. So obviously there's the building elements and the Euro elements where you're managing resources and time and investment, opportunity cost and all that jazz. But there's also a big social element in this game. There's the boom and bust criteria, and that can make and break you, literally. And there's also the ability, which is important, is not so much the mind reading, which if you can do that, that's cool. It's the table reading. And so what I mean about that is you can actually look around the table and use those Euro skills to see what people's intentions are and also what they're capable of. So everybody wants to build stuff and do a lot in this game, but it takes the resources to do that. So if I looked across the table and I saw somebody doesn't have some linchpin piece, like they don't quite have enough gold to build something, then I know that they might not try to go and build twice right now. Therefore, they might go and get gold, and that's a huge amount of information to me. That would let me know that maybe I'd have an opportunity to eke over there and boom, because they're not going to go there. And you can look around the table and see kind of the sense of where people are going with this. And as more experienced the players get, you all get on that level, and you can start to read the table, read each other, and read the arc of the game, because it's a short game. You only have 15 turns to play it, and so you have to see when people are kind of going like, Are they running out of time? Are they going to try to make a break for it with the resources they have, spend everything right now, or do they have time to sandbag a little bit and build up and come back later after they think the crowds have gone through? So read the table, read the players, and see what you can get out of it that way. And if you wanted to go really crazy, you could actually lie in the game if you want, in a sense. You don't have to be truthful in saying where you're going to go. You could even say out loud, like, I've got my dial and I'm definitely going to go onto the map and move my wagon. And then you set it down. And the truth is going to be what the dial says. It's not going to be that you declared you're going to go on the map. You can try to scare people away. But in truth, you might just go and go, I'm actually going to put people in the shootout and, you know, win this thing. So, you know, you can play around with that element depending on what type of group you have. If you wanted to otherwise play it more like a serious Euro, you could also do that too and kind of keep the table talk and banter to a minimum. And try to just, you know, let the numbers play themselves. So, however your style is, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for letting me ramble. See you guys.
Thanks, Johnny, for the tips. Well, we hope that you enjoyed the video, and we hope that you enjoy the game.
Now, if you'd like to get a sense for how this game plays, we've got a one-round playthrough video. You can access that through the link in the description.
If you like this video, please let us know by hitting the like button. Write your questions and feedback in the comment sections below. And if you'd like to join our Facebook group, Meeple University, to share your life of board game, please check us on Facebook.
And finally, if you'd like to be among the first notified of what's new from Meeple University, please consider subscribing to our channel. You can click on the Meeple in the corner to do so. Do hit the bell for notifications.
Until next time.